All right, welcome to the next video. In this video, I'll just be discussing few technical concepts that when we are writing code in Node.js, what is happening actually in terms of asynchronous calls and the synchronous calls. At the start of this tutorial series, I explained you that what is Node. It is actually a non-blocking input-output runtime. Okay, and the main reason behind it being asynchronous is the concept of event loop at its behind, and event loop plays an important role that there can be a lot of asynchronous calls being made in the code. And so let's talk about it. It's actually an architecture, and it actually plays an important role in asynchronous operations. So the event loop is responsible for managing and executing various events and callbacks in non-blocking manner. So if we remember our Node code up till now, we have been using fs module a lot, and in that we have been using the read file, write file a lot, and read file and write file or asynchronous code. And I showed you in one of my videos, or maybe in the more videos, that whenever anything asynchronous function is being called, whether it's the API call, reading file call, or anything else, it does not stop the rest of code in the file to stop executing. Okay, and if the API call or the file reading is taking 5 minutes, then the rest of code should keep on executing. It should not wait for things to be just because one file is being read. So let's talk about how the event loops work when you are working on a large project. Then it's very important that you keep these concepts in mind and understand how things are working behind the scenes. Okay, so first of all, there is a concept called event queue. If you have studied data structures in university, you must have studied stacks and queues. So stacks works in a first in first out manner. Means if you are in a bank, you want to submit your university fee and you are in a queue, you entered in the queue first and you will leave the first. That's the simple. If you are in the shopping mall, you are in a queue, you are at the first in the queue, and you will pay your bills first, right? So event queue actually uh, keeps all the asynchronous operation in its queue. So there can be 1, 2, 10, hundreds of asynchronous operation in its queue. Let's say there are hundreds of fs.read file, fs.write file, and then the stream functions, then the HTTP calls, then the EJS calls that we have been doing. All these are asynchronous operations. So what happens is when an asynchronous operation such as reading a file or making HTTP request is initiated, Node does not wait for the operation to complete. Instead, it continues executing the remaining code. And this is what I've already explained. This is the purpose of non-blocking code within the node, right? So event queue keeps the all the asynchronous operations that are pending to be completed in the form of queue. So the next thing is the callback. And whenever we use the event queues, all the asynchronous operations have the callbacks associated with it. And then the callbacks is actually keeps event queue actually holds all the completed callbacks. So once the queues is completed, there is a callback of each queue, each operation, each asynchronous operation. Then the queue actually converts all the completed asynchronous operations into callbacks, and then the event loop comes in. Event loop actually keeps on checking the event queue. Okay, so when it keeps on checking the event queue, it keeps on checking that how many callbacks exists in the event queue which are completed. So the callbacks which are completed in the event queue, event loop actually let it operate further within the callback function. So if you have remembered that we have a callback function and we have written the code inside it, so we have to keep these things in mind when we write a large lines of code or large files in it. So it keeps on executing, and when the callback completed, then event loops checks it, and it retrieves the callback at a time and just execute the rest of code inside it, right? And then the last thing is obviously this is how the non-blocking execution works in Node, and there can be hundreds of files, hundreds of asynchronous operations, non-blocking operations, and this is how it executes. And event loop really plays a role in it. Event loops and event queue and the callbacks. When you are creating some networking application, just like the chats, there can be hundreds of asynchronous operations. So you need to make sure, you need to understand, you need to keep these things in mind, that how these things are working. So this was it for this video. In the next video, we will talk about Express server, setting up Express server, which is the framework of Node. So let's talk about that in next video.